Ready to go. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to VICA's 32nd Annual Business Forecast Conference and to this hour of the Tourism and Travel Panel. My name is Scott Mills. I'm a VICA board member, proud co-sponsor of this conference, general manager of the Garland Hotel, and your moderator for today. Let's first thank our track sponsor, which is Clear Channel Outdoor, and our panel sponsors, which are Hollywood Burbank Airport and Sunhill Properties, the Hilton Universal City. So thank you very much. The biographies for most of the panelists are already in the journal and online, so I'm going to make very brief introductions so that we may have more time for your questions in a little bit. Our first guest is Adam Burke, President and CEO of the Los Angeles Tourism and Convention Board. Welcome, Adam. Mark Davis, Sunhill Properties and Hilton Universal City. Simon Hudson, professor with the University of South Carolina, and Patrick Lammerding, the Deputy Executive Director of Planning and Development for the Hollywood Burbank Airport. Hospitality and tourism are at the heart of the Los Angeles economy. The storybook history of Hollywood and the bright future of venues popping up throughout the city have drawn tourists from all over the world, but travel restrictions and forced closures have taken a huge toll on this industry that we're all in. And how do cities attract and welcome visitors back without compromising health and safety? That's a huge question. What changes can we expect to the way people travel and where they travel? Another giant question. I'm going to give each of the panelists a couple minutes to make an opening statement to get things started. And then we are going to ask a question of each of you and open it up for questions from the audience. And Stuart will help me with that. The best way to ask a question to our speakers is for you to click on the link below for the Zoom, and then you can type in a question that the speakers will see and can answer. Or if you want to stay on the Pathable platform, please send your questions through the chat box on Pathable, and VICA staff will make sure that the question gets over to me. So without further ado, Adam, want to talk about yourself for a moment, a couple minutes?
Oh, I don't think anyone wants to hear about me, but probably more travel and tourism. So, I'd really like to thank VICA for the opportunity to meet with you all this morning. I guess by way of opening, I'd actually like to look backward for a moment, because when you think about how we promote Los Angeles around the world, the Valley and Hollywood are just such critical tools in how we promote the destination. When I think about the Valley, I think about incredible outdoor spaces like the Japanese gardens. I think about a world-class culinary community. Certainly the attractions that bring people from all across the country and around the globe. But beyond that, I think there's also something to be said for the incredible collection of hotels we have. Scott, thrilled to see your property open again. And, Mark, congratulations on the upcoming expansion. I think that's terrific news. But also the relative affordability of the Valley and accessibility. I mean, Patrick, the ease of the experience coming in from Hollywood Burbank Airport, makes the Valley, I think, an incredibly attractive destination, not just for leisure travelers, but I don't think we can forget it's also an incredible hub for individual business travel and corporate meetings. So I guess, I would just like to say how grateful I am for the opportunity to participate, because the Valley is such a critical part of how we brand the destination around the world. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from both my fellow panelists, but also questions from participants today.
Thank you very much, Adam. Mark, you want to make a few opening remarks?
Good morning. Thank you, Scott. Yes, President and CEO of the Sunhill Properties, which headquarters at the Hilton Universal. Being in the industry for 4 decades, never seen anything like this. But looking back, we've had a great decade. We can't forget about the last 10 years or 9 years of great times. We ended up here. We're all in this together. I think there's been some great accomplishments with the leadership of the Los Angeles Tourism, Ernie Wooten and Adam and his team. Absolutely put LA on the map. So we're optimistic about the future. We don't think it's the sky is falling. We actually are trying to make great strides during this time to proceed with our expansion. They will come if you build it. We feel in Los Angeles, the Olympics is coming. We know that's a fact. things will change, and we just have to manage it well and get back open. So we're optimistic about the future.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. We also have Simon Hudson. You'd like to say a few introductory words, Simon, direct from Portugal right now.
Yeah, thank you,
Garland. There.
It's a pleasure to be with you, if not virtually, and I'd love to be there in person. I actually spent a year in California. I came home and did my MBA there 30 years ago, and it changed my life. I moved into academia straight after that, and actually spent 20 years in North America, and loved it. Yeah, I went part-time last summer. I'm living in Portugal at the moment, and I went part-time in order to do a little bit more traveling. And, you know, I went off around the world for 4 months teaching on semester at sea, which ended up in California in December. And then I was skiing in Canada quite happily until the pandemic. And it was, wow, as Mark said, I haven't seen anything like this in the whole of my career. I've been in travel for, 40 years. And I just felt that, it was very clear early on to me that the industry was going to be impacted more than perhaps any other sector. And also that the industry was having a cause for the virus spreading so rapidly. So I just sat down. I was in lockdown in Canada and decided to document it. And I don't know, we'll see. My plan is to travel off to Canada again for the winter, but I may end up getting locked down again and writing the second edition. But hopefully I can share some insights from the book with you on this panel.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And then last but not least, we have Patrick. A few words to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Patrick Lammerding. I'm a Deputy Executive Director at Hollywood Burbank Airport. I've been an airport manager in some capacity for 15 years or so. Haven't seen anything like this. Obviously, the aviation industry was impacted for September 11th. But this is something different. And, running an airport is an interesting thing, for-profit business. We're actually legally barred from doing that by the federal government. We can only use the revenues that we generate ourselves to operate and maintain the airport. And we do that in an agreement with the air carriers who serve the airport. So what all of that comes together is that the purpose of having an airport and running an airport is to act as an economic engine for the surrounding areas. And one of the tricky things we do in airport planning is we try to assess and predict and forecast the demand of surrounding communities. And that is probably the hardest thing to do right now that has ever existed in the aviation industry, at least, is to forecast what's going to happen over the next year or two and decide what we need to do at the airport to support the economic recovery of the areas from the pandemic. And that's an interesting thing. But the main point of all of it is that the airport's here for all of you, and we're doing what we can to make sure that we have the ability to support all of your businesses and industries in the recovery.
Did you cut off, or that was the end of it? I'm sorry. Anyway.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's about it. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about some of the upcoming projects that we're contemplating in the future for the airport in a moment here. I don't want to get too into that stuff. So
yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for that. We appreciate all the support, and we need it all, bringing all that lift into the city. Wanted to start with some questions. We'll start with Adam, and I have a few questions for you. And how was the pandemic? How has the pandemic impacted tourism revenue for the city of Los Angeles? And what challenges have you and LATCB faced due to stricter COVID-19 restrictions compared to other cities and states such as the San Diego, Las Vegas, and Florida? I have my own opinion on all that, but would love to hear from you.
Sure. So I guess I'll answer that in three parts. The first part is there's no way to overstate the impact this has on our industry. Before the pandemic in 2019, we welcomed over 51 million visitors to Los Angeles. They spent almost $25 billion in our local business community, and the total economic impact to our community was closer to $36 billion. Out of that $25 billion, we anticipate that we're going to lose about $10 billion, and that really hurts our business community in a significant way. But candidly, What I find most heartbreaking about it, and I think everyone's going through this, is the job losses we've experienced. What a lot of people may not realize is that travel and tourism had very quietly over the last decade become the third largest employment sector in LA County, with almost 545,000 Angelenos who were employed in tourism-related careers. That equates to 1 out of every 8.4 jobs countywide. So it's become a leading economic driver. And sadly, through the course of the pandemic, we've now seen job losses of over 32%. And Scott and Mark, I'm sure you can talk to this, you know, it's even worse in our hotel sector where the job losses have approached 45%. So yeah, there's no way to overstate. This is something we have not seen in our lifetimes. The second part of that, I will say, in response to your question about some of the restrictions, I will say there is probably no less enviable job on the planet right now than working in public health, because you're very much trying to balance out some very real health and safety concerns. And I think we've seen, you know, as of this week, 26 out of 51 states, and thankfully California is not one of them, but 26 out of 50 states in the country actually have the highest rate of cases they've had in a long time. So the national trend is going the wrong way. So I think it's incredibly important that we remain incredibly vigilant about professionally and personally sticking to the protocols. I think what we've seen is it's walking a fine line. Some people have talked about the notion that somehow health and safety are antithetical to economic recovery. I actually think they have to go hand in hand, because the reality is the only way we're going to be able to sustainably reopen our visitor economy is to make sure that we can continue to drive down the case counts. So when I look at some of the restrictions, I think there are some states that, you know, really got out ahead of this to their detriment, where they got out early, they saw significant spikes, and they really had to pull back. And that had a negative effect on them in a couple of ways. Number one, it suppressed visitation because visitors saw, you know, the spike in case counts. But beyond that, honestly, a lot of this is having the resources to outlast the recovery. And they burn through cash to promote tourism at a time when people weren't ready to hear it. So there are a few things we've done. So first of all, Los Angeles tourism has the benefit of the support of our local hotel community, and the tourism marketing district had the foresight to set aside funding several years ago in the event of catastrophic events like what we're facing right now. So first of all, you know, LA is in a position to effectively market through the recovery in a way that very few destinations are. That said, I think there's no question that, you know, I share the frustration that I'm sure many of you on the call have, in that there are certain sectors that have been allowed to reopen, whereas when you look at, for example, our meetings business, we still cannot hold meetings in the state of California, and that's a key driver for the Valley. And, you know, I think what we've tried to do, this is really an educational process, honestly, because when we've talked to county and state public health, and that's an ongoing dialogue, what we've had to do is educate them about the fact that, you know, unlike, pick one, an indoor shopping mall or a movie theater, our industry is probably the single best prepared to be able to properly implement all of the safety protocols. Through the county's Economic Resiliency Task Force and Patty McJennett, Javier Cano, Karen Ehrman from Universal, a number of people serve on that task force. The voice of industry is helping to shape public policy. So I think that's going to be an ongoing dialogue to let them know that we've been doing health and safety protocols for decades. This is just a new set that we need to implement, but we're probably in the best position to do so responsibly. So whether it be getting our theme parks reopened, getting the meeting sector reopened, those are our demand drivers. So I think, you know, while I certainly share the frustration that we'd like to be further along the path, I just want to assure you that we are collectively doing everything we can to educate public health on how we can responsibly and safely reopen our visitor economy. The last thing I'll say is I want to go back to what Mark said at the outset. I think we've got to look back. We've got to remember that before the pandemic, we had 9 straight years of record visitation. And while certainly it's going to take a while for us to get through it, there is every reason for us to be incredibly optimistic about the long term. Let's not forget that we have had a massive investment in infrastructure, whether it be the massive modernization project at LAX, the re-envisioning of the convention center, incredible new product like SoFi Stadium, the Academy Museum, the Lucas Museum. Those are all going to be massive drivers. Plus, there is no destination worldwide that has the decade of events ahead of us that LA has. Everything from the Super Bowl in 2022 and MLS's All-Star Game in 23. We actually just rescheduled Major League Baseball's All-Star to 22 from this year. And everything leading up to IPW in 24, the World Cup in 26, and obviously the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So while I think this is going to be a prolonged recovery, I think the reality is, the greater LA area is going to be in the best possible position to come through this relative to just about any other destination in the country.
Great. Yeah, I wouldn't agree with you more. I'm excited for those days to come. Thank you very much for that. And I wanted to move over to Mark, a few questions for you. And you've just begun the process of approvals for the Hilton Universal Expansion Project, which is very exciting. Competition for me, but in a good way. In addition to this, how are you preparing for bringing back large numbers of guests once the crisis is over? And do you expect that your hotel in the park will bring back the same number of guests or more?
Thank you, Scott. That's the $1 million question.
We'll say more.
I guess I would start by saying it's great to be next to a destination, except when they're closed. It's very painful. The hurt is when you look at 65% of our staff is on layoff right now. But we are optimistic about the future. We believe that NBC Universal will continue to hit it out of the park with opening new features. They are a destination attraction. They will come back. They will reopen eventually. It is unfortunate that we are the only state of all the union that is closed for events, for theme parks, for many other things. But confident that we're doing the right thing. I suppose we're managing the numbers is the quickest way to get open and sustain being open. So I respect the science. I respect the authorities that make those decisions. I think for our time, a little bit diversification has helped us. Our select service properties, we have a property in Simi Valley, 2 properties in Colorado that have actually fared very well during this time. People are traveling. They want to go. They want to get out. That's who we are. We're explorers, and we don't like to be penned up. So those areas that do open do show life. But the way we're preparing is, making sure we build the confidence of the traveler. The worst thing that a traveler can do is come to your place and then feel he's in a hot zone to be infected. We've done very well with that. All the brands that we have, Marriott and Hilton, both have certification programs that they require us to do for clean stay. The American Hotel Lodging Association has their guidelines. We follow all those, and we take and pick from each of those entities their expert opinions, the brain power of all those people that discover and create those items to keep people safe. So we practice that every day. So that's how we're preparing. We have to keep our guests safe, but we first have to keep our team members safe. And as things open back up, we have to continue to practice that protocol.
Great, thank you. Couldn't agree more with that as well. Professor Hudson, usually when we have visitors from other parts of the country, they'll fly into Patrick's Airport, stay at Mark's Hotel or at my hotel, and get to see all the sights of Los Angeles has to offer, and Adam will talk about. But you got shortchanged on this one. We owe you one next time around. But you recently published a book on COVID-19 and travel. And what insight does it give into the lessons the travel industry can learn from this crisis?
Well, there's a lot, but I'll just touch on 5, and I'll go through them briefly. And then if you'd like me to expand on any of them, I'm happy to. I think, first of all, it's already been referred to, that the crisis has really highlighted how vulnerable our sector is to what we call uncontrollable events. And I think what's happening, Mark and Adam sort of referred to growth of tourism. It's just grown year on year on year since the Second World War, really, 4 or 5%. So to have it hit back, not back so much, this word's used all the time, but it really is unprecedented. And I think it's been a wake-up call for some destinations that were perhaps over-dependent on tourism. You know, the need to be more resilient, and Mark just talked about diversification, the need perhaps for a more diversified economy. Maybe not somewhere like Los Angeles, but if you take some of the Caribbean islands that are, you know, 80, 90% of their GDP is tourism, they've really suffered. And, you know, and so I think in the future, you'll see examples. We're already seeing them, countries, you know, places like Barbados going after long stay visitors, digital nomads, people to come and live and bring their businesses to. So I think, you know, we're going to see more and more destinations diversifying, which is a good thing. I think secondly, what the crisis has shown is that businesses in our sector have to be willing to adapt. You know, I call it COVID adaptability, but the ability to sometimes not just pivot, but completely change business models. And I think this is going to be a crucial management skill moving forward. And, you know, we've had some good examples. Obviously, restaurants, when they were closed, focused on takeout. We had airlines delivering cargo. We had hotels catering to health workers, and now they're catering to people who are locked up inside and need a room to go away from home and work. But I think now the industry's got to adapt to the next stage of the pandemic, which is going to be characterized by health and safety, technology, lower numbers, and, you know, this whole new low-touch economy. And related to this, my third point is that we need to recognize that we're not going back to normal. You know, we keep hearing about the new normal, but we've changed. We've all changed us during this pandemic. And so the traveler will have changed. You know, the future traveler is going to be a lot more cautious. We're going to have to incentivize them to get traveling again. For them, the public health conditions are going to be critical, hygiene standards of destinations. They're going to change their booking patterns. Already we're seeing it's much more last minute bookings, much more staycations, more opportunities for domestic tourism than international tourism. So international tourism is going to take a long, you know, and business travel, it's going to take a long time to come back, as will big events and etc. And following on from that, I think, you know, someone mentioned, I think it was Adam talked about communication. One thing I've noticed is that, you know, during a crisis, often organizations cut their communication. This is a big mistake. I think communication during a crisis is critical. And those organizations that have been vocal, kept open lines of communication, they're the ones that are going to recover quicker from this crisis. And I have numerous examples of destinations, countries, organizations that have done this, but unfortunately, the majority haven't. They've kept quiet. And it's very, very important to keep vocal so that when we do get over this, and we will, you are top of mind. And it's also sending out a message of corporate responsibility, and we're still in business. And finally, I think this may be a positive for Los Angeles. I think that there may be a halo effect from the positive media that some destinations have received in dealing with the crisis and being perceived as relatively, you know, strict and COVID-free. You know, countries like New Zealand, the South Pacific, even Vietnam and Portugal, where I think they may move to the top of the list of desired destinations, not just for travelers, but for people moving. You know, we've already seen an uptick in people purchasing properties here in the Algarve in Portugal, because people are want to move out of the cities and want to go somewhere they perceive as safe. And I know, you know, it was mentioned about that health and wealth balance already, but I think those destinations that are perceived to have prioritized health may benefit in the long term. And again, I'm happy to come back to any of those points a little bit further on.
Great, thank you so much for those insights. And you have to tell us later where to get the book. Thank you for that. Patrick, the Hollywood Burbank Airport is very convenient and accessible for all of us that live in the Valley. We don't have to make that long trek to LAX. I know many of us flew out of there often for Sacramento trips back in the pre-COVID days. Tell us about the status of the replacement terminal project at Hollywood Burbank Airport, and what do you anticipate for the airport as we approach 2021?
Sure. So, right, the big project I have been working on for the past few years is our replacement passenger terminal. For those who might not be familiar with it, the existing terminal, the kind of core structure of it and the location of it is the same kind of geographic location on the airport that it's been for the life of the airport since 1930. Airport design standards since changed, and our terminal is not only 90 years old, well, portions of it, some of it's newer than that, but it's also just too close to the runways. And that's really the crux of the purpose for the project, is to replace that terminal somewhere else on the airport that meets current airport design. One of the nice things about doing that, though, in that we're not renovating the existing building, is that you get to rethink everything you're doing from scratch. And it's literally just a field, an empty, flat field that we're going to build the replacement terminal on. And so we're taking advantage of that initially, and we do in our development agreement with the city of Burbank, we are able to build more square footage, even though it's a replacement terminal, the same number of gates, same size aircraft, designed to, for exactly what we're doing today. The terminal we have today is, as many of you I'm sure have experienced, severely undersized for what we use it for today. And by severely undersized, I mean you're waiting in line for the restroom, for coffee. There's nowhere to sit down. It's the hallways are kind of tight. All of that isn't as nice of a place to be in as if we were to have a little more space. So with the little extra space we're going to be able to build to, it allows us to incorporate a higher service level within the actual terminal building, along with some other things as far as, the way you drop off and pick up passengers, things that are today very constrained just by the nature of it being such an old building that made work for so long. But now we throw this into the mix as far as, well, and everybody's asking me, what do you do differently now if you can design a terminal in a post-COVID world? And we don't have a great answer for that. Certainly, I think people's passenger behavior will change in some sense. We've learned some things that maybe, we've learned to do some things that maybe people were putting off before. Things like getting checked in and maybe self bag tagging your checked bags and things yourself, and doing that as you go through the airport in a more unassisted way. But also things like the way you order concessions. So rather than sitting down at a table or maybe in person going up to a counter, people are getting more comfortable with ordering food to be delivered to where they're sitting at a gate, or a grab and go option in the terminals. That's become something people are more comfortable with. And as people learn how to use that, I think that'll still exist into the future as in future airport passenger terminals. Also, I think people, and this sounds like a small thing and it's not, people are simply going to stand and sit farther apart. I think our personal space has gone from 3 feet to around 6 feet. And that's actually kind of a big deal when you deal with a facility that is all about people standing in line or sitting and waiting. And the way airport terminals that were built decades ago are set up now, it's in a thought process where, and also the way we've adapted to new security requirements in a post-September 11th world, we've managed to make things that people are now closer together. So I think one of the things as we reimagine our space will be, even if we don't have a standing requirement for social distancing, we have to assume that when people get into a queue for a security line, they're going to stand farther apart than they used to be, and we need more distance for that. Queues may be set up differently rather than a switchback type queue. Airports are actually moving to designs where they're more linear and direct into the space, not only for security checkpoints, but for customs, and then also even for concessions and for passenger boarding at gates. Again, that sounds like a small thing, and those are actually changes to airport design, to terminal design in particular. Now, as far as our actual terminal project, where we were, about to issue a request for qualifications for a design builder to actually take the project, design it, and build it over the course of 3 years, 2021 through 2024. And we had a program manager on board, AECOM was on board. They were putting together all the documents we needed so that a design builder do that design and then give us a price and a schedule for the build, and we can make that selection. That was happening, I remember like March. It was right about when this happened. So we are paused on the project right now, and watching the passenger recovery. We are currently, like basically every other passenger airport in the United States, we're about 5% down or so. So meaning we have like a quarter of the passengers that we had a year ago. So we're watching month by month as that inches its way back up, reported nationally. And as we do that, we'll be looking for the right time to restart that project and go back out to the industry with an RFQ for that design build. I think it's kind of obvious that as time goes on, we'll have to take a look back at those documents and the way we're going to do it, and maybe update it and make some changes to let folks know, in whatever the end product is that someone builds for us. And also the timing of that, that's the big question for everybody who's watching it is, obviously being on hold, I can't make any good forecast, as I mentioned before, on passenger demand. And the interesting thing about our project is it wasn't based on passenger demand. It's a safety project. And that's been the whole purpose for the past 25 years of pursuing the actual replacement of the terminal. So that makes it interesting, because it would actually be easier if it was passenger demand driven, because you could look and say, well, until we reach the same milestone, we won't reconsider a restart. But there was no milestone. So the purpose and need of the project is still there. Now we have to watch and make a judgment call about when the right time for that restart will be. And that's a very tough thing to do, to be honest. And I'd love to tell everybody I have an exact plan on how to do that. And I think like many of us, we're watching, we're making the best decisions we can as we move along, and we're supporting each other as best we can. But I don't have an exact, here's when we're going to restart that project. And I'll make one more point. And I think this is true across our industries. Prior to this pandemic, we were actually back at the same peak we were in 2007, which was our peak passengers in history. And I think that matches what I've heard about travel and tourism throughout the area. And there was a lull and a kind of a low point in 2015 session, but we had been recovering quite well ever since that point, all the way up until just prior to the pandemic. And so it kind of exaggerates the fall, I think, when you see that we were at this quite great peak. When I say we're 75% down or somewhere about there, it's like, well, yeah, but we're also 25% down from 2013. And that's a big difference. I think it's made it feel like such a shift and downturn, when in reality we were at the crest of a wave, and then this was a dramatic drop, and now we're watching that recovery happen.
Great, thank you, Patrick. I think we all can agree that we're all cautiously optimistic for the future of Los Angeles, and the $1 billion the $1 billion question is when, and can't happen soon enough, I think, in a controlled and safe manner, of course. We had some questions come through, and I'll continue to monitor the chat room. One question was, this is for the panel. Feel free to chime in. And what's the return timeline for business travel?
Sure. So we've been taking a very close eye on a variety of metrics. One thing I want to pick up on is, I think we have to recognize that consumer confidence is going to be based on consumer sentiment right now. And, going back to what Simon had said, the new currency is really feeling safe. But I think there are three dimensions to the recovery. One is going to be, do I feel safe traveling? The second is going to be, can I afford to travel? And the third is going to be, am I allowed to go where I want to go? So I think we have to be hitting on all three of those areas. What I'll say at the outset is we're beginning to see some encouraging signs of recovery. Scott, Mark, if you had told me a year ago that I would be celebrating surpassing 50% occupancy, I probably would have had my head examined. But I think it's important for everyone to know that in August and September, LA County hotels surpassed 50% occupancy for the first time since February. So that's a major milestone. We also know in terms of consumer sentiment that people are actually very anxious to travel. There is massive pent-up demand, and certainly that exists in leisure, but believe it or not, it also exists in IBT and it exists in the group segment. I had the opportunity to speak to GBTA's West Coast chapter a couple of weeks ago, and what was abundantly clear from the corporate travel planners is, they know that virtual and hybrid is here to stay, right? To Simon's point, that's one piece of technology that will continue to integrate, but they also know there are some things they simply cannot do through a computer screen. And I think we all would express that in terms of the Zoom fatigue we're all feeling. There was actually a terrific article, and candidly, I love it when it doesn't come from our industry because it doesn't seem self-serving. Harvard Business Review actually published a study about 3 weeks ago, and it was titled, Why Zoom Will Never Replace Business Travel. And they approached it from a very academic perspective. And they said, look, there are some things that we can do this way. But at the end of the day, the whole point of business travel is to exchange what they refer to as know-how. And know-how only comes from sitting in a room with a group of people. And it's the unanticipated and the spontaneous conversations that happen when you're with a group of people for an extended period of time. It doesn't happen organically in these 1 hour blocks that we've had to artificially live with. So Harvard's contention, and I think they're exactly right, is the reason why there's actually a lot of pent up demand, even for corporate business travel, is because this just doesn't get the job done. We've heard that from a lot of our group planners, a lot of large association clients. And even when we look at the numbers, there's no question there is significant pent up demand across the country, but even here in our own backyard, we did some primary research and we found out that, for example, about 3 in 4 Angelenos are actively planning to take a staycation this year. I realize that's not corporate travel, but we know the recovery is going to start right here at home. And I'll tell you, because I have an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and we've all been stuck at home for the last 6 months, I've taken 3 staycations all across LA in the last 60 days, including in Hollywood. And I have had a wonderful experience. The hotels are being so incredibly vigilant about the safety protocols. And I think, Simon, you said it perfectly. Our responsibility is to make sure that people know that the health and safety of our employees and our guests is the highest priority. And I think we even have to own that in the way we promote the destination. LA was one of the first destinations that was out in the market with advertising showing face masks in our advertising. And I'll tell you, that was a hotly debated issue. Is it a deterrent to show face masks? Well, Donsky, who was our chief marketing officer, and I give him huge credit for this, 120 days ago, he said, we have to film with face masks because otherwise people are not going to feel that we're taking it seriously. Well, the good news is he was right. There was just a national consumer sentiment survey done by Destination Analysts. 70% of Americans expect to see the safety protocols integrated into the way we talk about our destinations. So I actually think while corporate travel will be a little bit slower to recover, and that's largely because of financial implications, there's no question it will recover. And I honestly think the Valley is probably incredibly well positioned to do that because of the affordability factor.
Great. Thank you. Any other? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on that. It's so right what Adam's saying. Businesses will always make their business decisions on ROI. I mean, that's what you do. And the studies that I read, chiming in with what Adam said, virtual events have an ROI of maybe 5%, 5 to 1. Whereas in person, it's 28 to 1. So do the math. Business leaders figure that out. You can't substitute that. While Los Angeles, we enjoy a great transient demand in our market, there's so many great things to see and do here, and explorers love it, the theme parks. But without the corporate segment, we still would not perform like we need to in hospitality. It simply does not replace that. Our event space is quite expensive to own. You pay taxes on it. You have to heat it, cool it. It's a tremendous amount. And so part of our expansion is geared just to that, to be able to group up a little bit, because the transient demand, if you group up and fill your space, then you discount the rate. So we need more rooms. LA needs more rooms with everything coming to satisfy the corporate demand that will return because of the ROI and the continued transient demand. We believe that while it will be slow, it's important to keep championing LA and keep championing in-person meetings. Hilton is already doing event-ready promotion, making sure that people feel safe. There are hybrid meetings, a combination of virtual and in-person, but there's just no substitute for an ROI on an in-person meeting. Facts.
And Mark, just a quick thing to piggyback off of that. I think you're right. I think we can't forget that California is the world's 5th largest economy. Yes. And the incredible diversity of our economy means we actually looked at this. If you look back at the history of LA, after every major event that has dramatically impacted our industry, whether it be the Great Recession or 9/11 or so many things over time, LA has been one of the first markets to come back nationally because of the size and diversity of our economy. So I think you're exactly right, Mark. The ROI is what's going to drive LA returning faster than some other markets.
Right. Excellent. And then we'll have that lift for the business traveler in and out of Hollywood Burbank Airport.
Yep.
In the new terminal. It's going to be beautiful. Sort of a loaded question. So how have the policies approved by local and state leaders impacted the tourism and hospitality industry, and what are some lessons learned? I think we're still learning them, and suffering, but anyone want to take a bite on that one a little bit?
I guess I could chime in for a couple minutes. It's been difficult. Part of the difficulty has been to anticipate the change. Early on, the changes were announced, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, okay, you can open. Well, how do you have to prepare to call people back. When you call people back, you have to retrain them. We restructure their tasks. We have to make sure they understand how to keep themselves safe, follow the safety protocols to serve the guests. So you can't just turn the lights on and open when there's a transition. So now we've learned to watch the tier system, and we anticipate. We got very, very close to opening recently in the dining rooms. While we love the California sun that I think we can enjoy even more than Florida does, frankly. It's not as humid here. It's chilly in the morning. So how do you serve breakfast outside? You put a heater out, but if it's a little windy, it's just not as fun. So some of the changes that we have that would help us is just a little bit earlier announcement. In 5 days, we think you're going to be able to open. We try to anticipate that, but having a little notice for operations and logistics planning is just better. I'm sure that NBC has put several models together for their reopening. What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? How do they talk to their people? But it's hard to bring staff and retrain them or help them be prepared for that if you don't know when it's going to happen and when your revenue stream will be returned.
Right. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, Mark, I think you're exactly right. And I can give a little bit more color commentary around this. So Patty McJennett, who I know you all know, is our Senior Vice President of External and Cultural Affairs. And she actually serves on the county's Economic Resiliency Task Force. And it's worth talking for a second about that. I think, while I know it's been an incredibly frustrating process because we'd like to see more sectors of our local tourism economy open, I think the thing that is beginning to work very well is that county task force has representatives from across all of the different verticals working hand in hand with Barbara Ferrer and LA County Public Health. So you've got the right people. So for example, the professional large sports events venues is headed up by Casey Wasserman. If you look at our local attractions, Karen Irwin from Universal sits on that. If you look at the hotels, Javier Cano, who is both the chair of the Government Relations Committee at the state level for Cal Travel and is also the head of the Tourism Marketing District. He and Patty have been working hand in glove with Mark and Scott and so many GMs. So I think the reason it's taking a longer time is we have to educate people about our business in a way we never have before. And what I will say is I think there's a little bit of a misperception that the folks in Sacramento just don't get our business. You know, that might have been true 120 days ago, but I think because of the concerted efforts of Cal Travel and Lynn Morfeld and CHLA, they do understand how committed we are to safety and responsibility. I think at the end of the day, the key takeaway from a state perspective, candidly, is they're following the numbers. So I think that's what's been so frustrating, is because, you know, LA is the most populous county in the most populous state in the country. It's going to be challenging to hit some of those metrics. And Mark, what you were alluding to, the two metrics that get you from one tier to another, and you have to stay there for 2 consecutive weeks, are your test positivity rate and the number of cases adjusted per 100,000 residents. Well, on the case counts, you need to be below 7 out of every 100,000. About 3 weeks ago, we were right at 7, and then it jumped to 7.3 and then to 7.6, and we're actually at about 8. So we're going the wrong way. And then the other one is your case positivity rate. And we were already way down on that one. You may recall, you know, the riskiest tier is purple, which is considered widespread, then red, then orange, then yellow. We were actually in the orange level on our positivity rate. We were down at around 2.8%. And now our positivity rate is up around 3.6 or 3.7%. So I think we're in a good place in that we've been working very closely with state public health. And now they really do understand how safely we can do this. In fact, one of the comments from the state and the county was that the protocols developed by our industry are among some of the best they've seen. But at the end of the day, until they see those positivity and case counts go down, that's going to be what's going to really impact our ability to move up in the tier system.
Great. Well, thanks for that. Yes.
On the importance of collaboration between industry and government. One thing I noticed doing my research, well, in fact, I was on a panel just a couple of weeks ago just like this, but it was set in Bangkok for the Asian market. And I was amazed how critical the industry was of the government. And it was really because of a lack of education collaboration. And it was so vehement. Some of the comments on the chat room, they had to remove some people from the conference because the industry felt they were being strangled by all these regulations, one after another, and that, you know, when are we going to open? But so it's really, really important to educate the industry and collaborate with them on, you know, but on both sides, government and industry. Collaboration is critical.
Great, thank you.
Interestingly, one of my challenges for our ownership, who is in Asia, their hotel product over there is already back to the 90 percentile. So on my calls, they say, what are you waiting on? Why aren't you there? So they're recovering much faster in Asia.
Well, they are, and that's the thing, you know, and I was saying to them, look, you will recover faster, and you know, so that you've got to be patient. It's long term. And, you know, obviously in Asia, they've learned from previous crises, but at the same time, I think because they've locked down so severely, so quickly, that they're now, you know, some countries, Taiwan, Vietnam, are just coming out of this. I mean, in China, travel's back to the same levels it was last year. It's incredible.
And you know what, that's a really good point, Simon and Mark, because one of the things we take a very close look at is our peer set. And among our major destination peer set, we're actually number 2, and just by a hair in terms of all key metrics. We're only trailing San Diego in terms of RevPAR, and it's by 2 cents, which, yes, that's a little vexing. We're, you know, right neck and neck on occupancy. And I think the other thing we have to recognize, a lot of the data that you all see reported, particularly from STR, is not adjusted necessarily to true up the lack of recovery in hotel supply. So one of the things when you right size it, we're actually at a point where, believe me, even one hotel being closed is too many. You know, it's devastating in terms of the job loss. But let's remember that 120 days ago, we had almost 90 hotels closed indefinitely. That number is now down under 15. And if you look year over year, we actually are only down about 5.5% on our room supply. By comparison, a city like New York, for example, if you look at the raw occupancy number, it looks like they're recovering at the same rate as LA. But if you layer in what would it be if they had their full room supply, they're trailing us by about 20 points. So on a national basis, you know, San Diego and LA are the top two in terms of the recovery process to date.
Great. Thank you for all that input. Something that I think Patrick will have a little bit of insight on this and touched on it a bit, but a question we got was, what changes are airports, including Hollywood Burbank, making to ensure that people feel comfortable to travel again? And I know you touched on some things for the new terminal, but anything else to add to, to add insight to this and what will make people, whether it's leisure travel or business traveler, the group traveler, feel safer in airports?
Sure. But one of the tough things about running an airport is that it's there's a perception by the public that an airport is all kind of one entity, one business, that everybody works for us somehow. The firefighters, the airlines, the air traffic controllers, the fuelers, like it's all us somehow, and that's couldn't really be further from the truth. It's an assemblage of these different businesses and these different entities that come together in this facility, and that makes it very difficult because, as we've seen during the pandemic, you have different airlines with different protocols. You have different other types of business that are trying to deal with their own protocols and have that all in the same space and interacting with one another. Being that their customers are interacting with one another, has made it a very tricky thing for us to navigate. And so what we focused on, and I think we've done our staff has done an excellent job, is letting people know when they travel to the airport, what do they need, what will they expect, what do we expect them to do? A great example is, mask wearing. At some point that was a big question. Do I have to wear a mask in the terminal? It seems simple to us now, but for a bit there, we did run a bit of a campaign and put up signs, and we decided to do it in a way that didn't feel very authoritarian, I would say. It's not a big, black and white, wear a mask or don't come in kind of a stark sort of sign or something like that. The program they did, if you look and you see it in the terminal now and on our public communications, it's be a hero, wear the mask. And they did a great job of, I don't want to say making it fun, but making it kind of not a scary thing. And one of the other things you'd see in the news a lot, all this this commotion about passengers refusing to wear a mask and going to get hauled off, and we're trying to figure out, okay, what are we required to do? Because the reality is our police department is going to have to be into the line support for our tenants, the airlines, and for the passengers as customers and guests if somebody is causing by, say, not wearing a mask in an airline, saying we need you to wear a mask if you're going to be on the aircraft, et cetera. It turned out that we had zero problems. Even when we needed to ask people who maybe didn't know, we'd like you to wear a mask, we were able to obtain masks from FEMA delivered us quite a number of masks. We were able to offer masks to people to wear, and it worked out very well. And I kept asking the question to our police department, our safety department, are we having issues with that? And they said, no, we're not. We were expecting we might. And it turns out that people were as travel restrictions were restrictions that were maybe preventing people from traveling were being lifted, and there was a little more flexibility. Passengers, the pent-up demand showed itself, and they came right back in. People were more than happy to adhere to whatever anyone was asked to do, whether it's the airline they're flying on, the restaurant they're sitting in, or the airport that they're traveling through. They're more than happy to comply with all those things. Now, I mentioned before, I keep getting the question, are there things that are going to remain in place? I actually don't think there's a lot of things that will remain in place that will be especially visible unless we know what we're looking for. That will be, well, before the pandemic, there wasn't this, and now here this is. I think there will certainly be a number of changes how we integrate those things into our facilities and what a passenger or customer experience is like. But it won't, I think what we did with the mask campaign, I think a lot of it will get sort of softened into daily life. So like, I mentioned the way we design queues. Well, that might be something that in the future we'll just see, well, yeah, queues are now linear, they're not switchback. It's like, and somebody might mention, well, that's a result of that pandemic 10 years ago. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought it was just something they changed. And so I think, and seating configurations in hold rooms, we're all used to those long, linear things where you're sitting right next to somebody, and that was a way to get a lot of people into a space. But seating configurations, their job of changing that to where you're not right next to somebody, but you can still have the same number of people in that space, and it's a lot more comfortable for people. That might be another thing that's sort of transparent to the customer, but that is something that is a result of this, or that is accelerated by this. So I think there will be a number of things. I don't think it'll be a really dramatic, obvious change that people will find, how do you put it, somewhat scary or annoying or anything like that. It'll be something that we're allowed to integrate into our facilities and the way we do business that will actually, I think, be quite a bit different than the way we integrated new security protocols in the past, because this isn't really a security thing, it's a health and safety thing. And we, as you all do in your businesses, learn how to do that while providing a nice experience for the customer.
Great. I was going to ask too, just in regards to the airport, and then it extends to airlines. I personally haven't traveled on a plane since late February, coming back from Ireland in the UK. So how do we, there's a lot of reports lately that transmissions in flight is very, very low, the rate. Can you speak to that a little bit, or does anyone want to chime in on that?
Well, I'll just, being a pilot, I've been asked by some people I know who are saying, well, would you travel right now? Maybe this is, a few months ago. And my answer then is the same as now. Is I would rather be on an airplane for an hour than in a Walmart for an hour. Aircraft, I think everybody's learning a lot. Aircraft are not these enclosed, when the door shuts, it's not this enclosed space where the air is going round and round, you're breathing when everybody else is breathed out. It's not how that works. There's constantly fresh air moving through that cabin. There's constantly air being exhausted through that cabin. There's actually a hole in the back about that big. And the way a pressurization system works, it's actually changing the air out several times per hour. And it goes through HEPA filters, and there's a lot more that goes into those, the air in a cabin than people realize. And I think, my opinion, is that is likely a lot of what we're seeing in terms of low transmission rates on aircraft. It's a tough thing to convince people of, because you are in this enclosed, confined space, and you're right next to people, especially if they don't have that middle seat blocked. But it's not surprising to me at all that now that we have some data, that they're not finding that aircraft are the source of transmissions in groups.
Yeah, Patrick,
I think as well that one thing that's going to get international travel going again, way before a vaccine, will be instant testing. And we're already seeing that, but I've been saying for some time, I think technology is going to lead the way, and the industry will lead the way. And we'll have instant testing at airports all over the world. And so that will reassure passengers, as well as you say, this data that's coming out. And I've flown since the pandemic, and I'll fly again because I felt reasonably safe. And that was early on in the pandemic. But certainly if there's instant testing that cuts out the necessity to quarantine, that'll get people traveling again.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Simon and Patrick. Again, a great third-party study that just came out in the last month was actually, of all places, from the Department of Defense. And the DoD partnered with United Airlines, and they tested 300 flights, and they found a transmission rate of 0.0003. I think that's the educational component of this that we need to let people know. The second piece of it is, Simon, I couldn't agree with you more. A lot of the airlines are already saying that they know that, rapid testing is going to be the key to restoring confidence. There's a very successful pilot program in the UK right now that is giving the people the opportunity to, get the test, have it on their app and use it to show that they're able to safely arrive in the US coming out of Heathrow. But I think the other important thing is the speed with which this is happening. You know, if you think about it, to Simon's point, about 120 days ago, it cost about $100 to get a test, and people were waiting 7 to 14 days to even get a result. Well, 4 months later, it's down to about $7 a test and average about 15 to 30 minutes to get a result. And Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that based on that pace, he expects that within the next 90 to 120 days, it's going to be under $5 a person and results in less than 15 minutes. That's a total game changer for meetings, for getting on an airplane. If you think about it, you know, we all pay a $4.50 passenger facility charge when we buy an airline ticket. I'll happily pay another $4.50 to get a COVID test.
Yep. Great. Kind of with all that, then now that we've established it's safe to fly, and I know Professor Hudson, you had a few words earlier with some places to visit, but the question everyone wants an answer to is where and when should we plan our next vacation?
Well, obviously I should say Los Angeles, but I think as a consumer right now, I think just like the industry, you have to be adaptable, flexible. I think just keep an eye, you know, so dynamic, such a dynamic industry, and the way things are changing. Obviously, it's important for consumers, as we've already talked about, to be reassured that it's safe to travel. But once they've overcome that and they feel more comfortable, I think a lot of it is about travel insurance. And, you know, down here, the Portuguese government stepped in once the travel company said, we're not covering you. The Portuguese government stepped in and said, yeah, you come to Portugal and we'll cover you. Don't worry about your healthcare. You're fine. So it's constantly reassuring travelers that it is safe. And once people get back used to traveling again, they'll continue to do so. And but you know, it's going to take some time. It's to build that confidence back in the market. Where to go? As I say, I think there may be this halo effect where destinations that have prioritized health, perhaps a little bit over wealth, may benefit in the long term. But we'll see. That's still early days.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a caveat on this. This is an unabashed pitch that I'm about to make. But I think, you know, one of the silver linings that has come out of this is I think Angelenos are now more aware than they ever have been about just how critical our industry is to the economic engine of LA. And I think the main reason for that is with job losses, you know, of 1 in 3 across our sector, this is people's friends, their neighbors, their family members who are out of work. So that's why we launched a campaign called LA Love that was really focused on over 100 special offers by Angelenos for Angelenos, because I think, you know, we all want to say, what can we do to make a difference here? You know, we're all hurting. So the numbers are staggering. We looked at it, and if, you know, look, we recognize there are some folks who simply don't have the financial means right now, but for those who do, if employed Angelenos were to just support 3 local restaurants and visit 3 of our local attractions and have just 1 3-night stay in a hotel, that would help us recover over 21,000 jobs in LA County, and it would inject $1.4 billion back into our local business communities. So when you think about it, I think not only is LA a very safe place to get out and about for a staycation, because we have been so vigilant about the protocols, but I think the recovery has to start at home. And if we're all able to do that, we're going to get a lot of our colleagues back to work.
Yeah, let's hope we can continue the recovery.
Yeah.
Thank you for that insight. Another question that came through is about, we kind of touched on this a bit, but tourism destinations are all grappling with what has happened and what to do next. Just from the group, do we have any advice for them moving forward?
Well, I'm happy and feel confident the way NBC is planning, and they have on the ground experience in Orlando already being open, and in Japan they're open. They're a very diversified company with all their streaming and production and all that. So thankfully they're very healthy financially and can support that, and likely open before it makes sense financially. But with that experience, and I know they're sharing that with our California friends. They should listen to that. I think they're doing it well. They have to have numbers by now, and tracing contact data and all that, and infections. So I think if we pay attention to the numbers and they have those numbers to share, we should get open sooner. I think we have to be more not afraid, but I think practical. I do think we have to pay attention to the numbers, but they have the protocol. They've tested it. They've driven the car and they know what works. So I have total confidence that they'll open and do a great job.
Right.
Yeah, I would add to that, let's look at the success stories globally. This is not a time for us to be parochial about it and assume we have all the answers. If you look at Vietnam, if you look at South Korea, if you look at Singapore, not only were they incredibly effective in crushing the initial surge, but they have had spikes and they were very quick to respond to those. So I think, this is one of those times to look at best practices anywhere globally and nationally that we can find them. And one of the things I'm proudest of is, the degree to which the travel and tourism community has really come together and said, this is not a time to make this a point of competitive differentiation. This is a time for us to make people realize that Los Angeles as a market and California as a state is incredibly committed to safety and health. It's not, an opportunity for, any market within LA to try and say our protocols are better than someone else's. It goes to what Simon said. I think we have to own the fact that the health and safety of our employees and our guests is the highest priority, because that's what's going to get a sustainable recovery for us. So I just think we need to own it and be upfront about it.
Right.
And just a quick point to finish on that, on the question. I think for some destinations, this is an opportunity. It wasn't long ago I was teaching about over tourism, and we've suddenly gone to under tourism, but there's a lot of places around the world, Barcelona, Venice, that really were struggling. Residents didn't want to welcome tourists anymore. And so this might be an opportunity to press the pause button, to rethink, well, how do we want to come back? How can we be more sustainable? How can we be more resilient? And so, as I say, it's not all bad. There is an opportunity. We've had this, like we are today, we've had the time to talk and collaborate, as Adam said, and look at examples around the world, and maybe we'll come back stronger.
Well said. Another question was, how can Los Angeles differentiate itself from other popular locations as we continue to face the COVID-19 pandemic? How can individual attractions differentiate themselves post COVID-19?
Yeah, honestly, I think we're lucky. Under the heading of I'd rather be lucky than smart. One of the reasons why Los Angeles, and I won't even say may, I will say will recover more effectively than a lot of other destinations, is we have an incredibly diverse product offering. There are destinations, my friend Jay Burris down in Anaheim, I feel badly for him because he's in a very unenviable position. Anaheim is driven by Disneyland and the convention center. And with neither of those open, they're going to be facing some very challenging days ahead. While certainly it's critical that we get every sector of our visitor economy reopened, let's not forget a couple things. Number one, the product pillars that we talk about when we promote the destination nationally and around the world are incredibly diverse. Number one, in terms of arts and culture, we actually have more museums and performing arts venues than any other city in the entire US. And that, people are being very creative about how they can innovate to still keep content relevant. The Music Center, for example, is doing a center stage program that's all virtual content to try and keep them top of mind so that people still want to come to LA when they feel comfortable doing so. Second thing is our culinary community. Again, I talked earlier about the Valley having such an incredibly eclectic and I think really world-class culinary community. We know from our research that particularly with millennials, and that's one of the most lucrative audiences, culinary has become one of the primary drivers of the purchase decision for individual leisure travel. So we have a culinary program that Zagat last year called the most exciting food city in America. The third piece of that is sports and entertainment, right? I mean, we're synonymous with Hollywood, but I would go so far as to argue that we've now become the sports capital of the world. we have more professional sports teams and venues than any other city on the planet. And when you think about, kind of our long-standing storied venues like Chavez Ravine, all the way up to newer venues like Bank of California Stadium and now SoFi Stadium, we're going to be able to bid on pieces of business we've never been able to before, as well as all the mega sporting events that I mentioned earlier. And the last one is, let's face it, we've got 300 days of sunshine in LA. Outdoor and wellness is something that we just organically own. And right around the time that maybe there is some stronger recovery, a lot of the markets that tend to come here because it gets damn cold where they live, LA is going to look very attractive. So, that's not to diminish the fact that this is going to be a heavy lift. I mean, tourism economics estimates so that it's going to take us about 2.5 to 3 years to see full recovery. But I think it's the incredible diversity of our product and service offerings that mean we're not reliant on any single thing. It's a balanced portfolio that I don't think any other destination in the country can really have as an option.
Great.
So Adam, I just want to congratulate, and we're so lucky to have you and your team. Your marketing team not only has the right messaging to yell about LA, it has the right timing. You guys are masters. You have the right leadership on the team. Being on the board, I'm privy and have seen the recent ads and also the timelines of your releases. That messaging is so important, and you guys do it right. So very lucky to have your team.
I really appreciate that, Mark. And that's much more a reflection on them than on me. They've tried to be very data driven. And to your point, on both the sales and marketing side, they have very closely looked at consumer and planner sentiment. So, you may recall that, 3-4 months ago, Vegas was already out in the marketplace. Well, consumer sentiment research said people didn't want to hear it. They were not ready to start traveling, and they burned through a lot of cash. So, to your point, Don Schio, who's our chief marketing officer, we intentionally didn't get in the market until we saw consumer sentiment shift enough to tell us that people were ready to start traveling. But, again, I'm incredibly privileged to work with the group of people I do, and I appreciate that feedback. Much more a reflection on them than on me.
Excellent. Yeah, it's been an amazing process here, and I think we are, as a city, grappling with it and approaching it right, and trying to be, timing right too on the messaging to come back to LA and continue to do that. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the venues and so forth, but just for the group and looking forward to the Olympics in 2028. A lot of updates, a lot of projects happening that we'll see in Los Angeles, from Mark's expansion to the new airport at Burbank, the new terminal, to more sports venues and so forth. And then also from lessons learned from these times. How can we ensure that residents receive the economic and industrial benefits from the Olympics? And I know it's 7 years away, but that'll happen fast.
I think it's be ready. You can't be late. Can't show up late. Thankfully, the city is moving forward with the transportation improvements at the airport and throughout the city. The room nights that are in the pipeline, even that will be a far stretch in meeting the needs of this special week or event of time. But we need all that, and we need to not grow weary or pessimistic about that happening, because it is going to happen, and we have to plan and be ready. It's one of those things you can't get ready in a day or two or even a year or two. And thankfully, we've had great leaders preparing for quite some time with the reality that it's coming in 28.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think the thing that people can't forget is the reason why LA was selected. So to your point, Scott, about how can residents get the benefit? A lot of people who have gone through hosting an Olympics have said, you don't make major investments in infrastructure for a 10-day event. The reason LA was selected is twofold. Number one, we already have all of the facilities we need by and large to successfully host 28. Number two, we are the only city that has successfully run 2 Olympics at a profit. And in fact, to this day, the LA 84 Foundation is still using those funds to fund youth sports programs throughout underserved communities in LA. So I think the reason why residents are going to get the benefit is because there is no massive expenditure that the city of LA is going to have to undertake in order to host the Olympics. We already have the infrastructure. And in fact, we have an even better infrastructure and product offering than we had back in '84. So that's one piece of it. Is the whole reason we were selected is because we will see that economic benefit, and it's not a risk. The second piece of it, though, is I think we also need to remind ourselves, a lot of people talk about 28 and the Olympic and Paralympic Games. But while it's a good thing, I think we also need to remind ourselves the runway is a hell of a lot shorter than that, because in less than 15 months, we're going to be hosting a Super Bowl. And then, you know, over the course of the next decade, we talked about those mega events. If you talk about a global spotlight being on LA, it's not just going to be in 28. It's going to be the World Cup in 26. It's going to be IPW in 24. So we're actually only, 36 months away from really hosting thousands of guests from all over the world. And that's the perfect timing, because that's when we'll really have fully come through the recovery process.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. And then Patrick, with the airport, with the new terminal, are there other things being done for these mega events, or that is part of the planning for it, obviously, with the capacity?
Well, actually, not really. So the capacity term, a question. Anybody who says they know what the capacity of the current terminal is should give me a call. But and we're not designing to a certain capacity because we are looking to meet forecasted demand. Again, it's a safety project, it's a replacement. But like I mentioned, what I want to do is maintain a better service level within as passenger demand increases. Now, looking to all these events that we're looking to host and be a part here, and that we are looking to be one of the transportation connections to. The airport. A lot of people don't realize this. Is positioned amongst rail lines. No other airport in the LA basin, or really in Southern California for that matter, is positioned with the Antelope Valley line and the Ventura County line. And the connections, the intermodal capability we have at the airport is really if you want to look at our capacity to flow people to other locations in Los Angeles without them having to get into a car and spend a bunch of time on a highway or a freeway. That's the advantage that we have in this airport. And that's one of the things that we're really making sure that we maintain and to whatever extent we can improve. And one of the big improvements we've watched happen is the North Station on the Antelope Valley line. So I live in Santa Clarita, for example. I could drive a mile, get on a train, go to the airport, get on a 5-minute shuttle and get to the terminal and get on an aircraft. That's not true of any other airport in this area. And that's one of the things that we're constantly looking to improve upon, so that when the time comes at a big event like an Olympics, that it's time and we know the freeway is going to be are going to be packed as they often are, and we're looking for other modes of transportation and other mode splits. We're going to be able to raise our hand and say, this is what we're capable of here from the airport over here that people might not really expect.
Great, thank you for that.
Just to make a comment on the Olympics, just a quick one. I'm a big fan of hosting mega events to put destinations on the map, and I lived in Calgary for 10 years, and they basically put themselves on the map because of the '88 Winter Olympics, and I was disappointed that they didn't. The residents basically voted not to bid for an upcoming Olympics, and I think a lot of that was it's about educating the residents about the return on investment. And involving them in the event. And I think a lot of it's about, and Adam talked about looking around the world at best case examples. There's some great examples, Sydney, Barcelona, London, Vancouver, who've really leveraged their mega events from a tourism point of view. And I think it's important that Los Angeles does that. And I'm sure they will, because they usually do everything. And the good news, we might have a vaccine by then. So.
Indeed. Hopefully. It's a long ways away. Just have a few minutes left. I thought I'd give everyone 1 minute to have a closing remark, and then I'll say a few things, and we'll move on to today's the next event here. But thank you all of you for being here. But I wanted to give you 30 seconds to a minute just to have a closing remark if you wish.
Want me to start?
Sure, Simon, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, well, for me, I thought the title of this conference was very apt, because so many organizations I've spoken to, doing the research for my book, it was all about survival. And as I've said already, I think that, the key 3 C's really, the COVID adaptability, the ability to be flexible, adapt to change the circumstances is going to be critical moving forward. Communication, crisis communication, again, that we've already talked about, the tone of message, keeping lines of communication open to everybody, and then collaboration. We can't go do this alone. There's no roadmap. Well, there is a book, this one, but really there's no roadmap. This is unprecedented. So we need to work together to come through this, and we will. It's a very resilient industry. We've come through, problems, issues before, and so, but it may take some time. We just have to be patient. Great words. Patrick, anything from you before we sign off?
Sure. And, I know I mentioned before, but, the way an airport operates, I see it as a support and an engine. And, we're here for all of your industries and businesses, and we're doing it to make sure that we're here to support the increase in demand during the recovery from this. And, we're here for all of you.
Thank you very much. Mark?
Well, what I guess I would say is we're closer to the end than we were 8 months ago. I remember when this started, I told my team, 6 or 8 weeks will be done. Here we are 8 months later and still trekking. The thing that I continue to tell my team to encourage them is do what you can do. But that's all you can do. We're all in this together. Every industry, some are hurting worse than others. Some jobs are cutting worse than others. But the fact is, and it will always be, opportunity is all about preparation and timing. We have to be prepared. We do, live broadcast to our team that it is off, encourage them, telling them updates, giving them updates on what we know. It's kept our team connected. They're encouraged. We encourage one another. So I guess my closing remark is let's just stay in this all together, encourage one another. Hope is not out of the window. We will get through this. It will end. And when it does, we have to be ready.
Indeed. And Adam, any last closing remarks?
I guess I would pick up on what Mark said. I think the most important thing is for us to continue collaborating across our industry. I think one of the things that stood us in good stead is even those destinations locally who we might view as kind of collegial competitors have been working together to make sure that this is one of those times where the more successful LA is as an overall market broadly, that's going to benefit all of us. So, I think just continue the collaboration. And to that end, a lot of people don't realize that Los Angeles Tourism is actually a nonprofit. And we have the privilege of representing over 1,100 member organizations throughout LA County. So what I would just say is, remember, we're here for all of you. So if there's anything we can do to help better support you through your recovery process, whether it be providing you with research and data, whether it be looking for more creative ways to help market the Valley in Hollywood, we exist to support and serve all of you. And I couldn't agree more with what everyone said. While this may be unprecedented in its magnitude, we are incredibly resilient, and there are definitely brighter days ahead.
Yes, for sure. We can't wait for those days. I do want to thank all our panelists. It was a great hour and a half of time and very timely topics and a lot of great insight with Adam with LA Tourism and Mark with Sun Hill Properties, Professor Hudson from the University of South Carolina via Portugal, and then Patrick with the Hollywood Burbank Airport. I really appreciate your time this morning, but we're out of time now for this panel at least, and I want to thank our track sponsor again, Clear Channel Outdoor, and our panel sponsors, Hollywood Burbank Airport and Sun Hill Properties in the Universal City Hilton. Normally we'd have a big round of applause for all of you, but virtually it makes it a little difficult. So just a great big thank you again for spending your morning with us. Just a side note, two things. Stuart wanted me to make sure everyone knew he was on the LA 28 board and helping bring the Olympics here and hopefully events to the Valley and rooms to the Valley and so forth. But our keynote speaker today will be at 11:50 a.m. So in about 12 minutes. Encourage all of you to visit the exhibitors so you can enter for the raffle, a chance to win a lot of great prizes, including round trip tickets on Southwest, hopefully out of Hollywood Burbank Airport, and a signed jersey from the LA Rams. Hopefully they'll be the third champion in our city this year, and lots of other gift cards and so forth. So thank you again for everyone and all our panelists for joining this morning. Have a wonderful Friday. And we'll see you in a few minutes at the exhibit.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
You well.